Um, well, we're going to be starting the life of Joseph tonight. The actual teaching, like chapters 37 through 50 in the book of Genesis, we won't get into until next week. This is going to be kind of a long, hopefully organized intro. um, it's I know you guys are familiar with the book. It's an awesome story, and the book itself. I'm reading a book called Gleanings of Genesis by Arthur Pink, and he cites over 100 examples of pictures, types, foreshadowing of the Messiah uh, through the book, through the different people in the book and different instances during the book. It's just amazing. And of course, just with Joseph here, it's simply there's one right here where he says he was the object of his father's love, like Christ was. He was hated by his brothers, like Christ was. He was rejected by rulers, like Christ was. And then ultimately, he was raised from a place of humiliation to glory, like Christ was. So that's just one example right there. But I thought that in doing the intro, there's an interesting part of it, and that's the human side of it too. Not that this part of it would seeing Christ in the scriptures is not important, because it is, but there's a human side to this that we can probably identify with in a lot of cases. And so I backed up to chapter 25, which is basically where Isaac and Rebecca has twins in her womb, and it's Esau and Jacob, and then kind of comes forward from there, and then also got into, or will get into, Jacob's family members, Leah, Laban, Rachel, Jacob, his brothers, as a way to kind of set the stage for this story as we go through it starting next week. So we can keep that in mind. And I know that God was, his sovereign hand and his providence is so obvious in the story of Joseph. There's no doubt about that. But it seems like there's also that element of Joseph using things from his growing up, his family life, and what he saw, what he learned, what he learned. Don't do that. I'll watch Uncle Laban, and then I'll do something opposite of that. But there's also that part, so that we don't have to always go around going, well, I've been snake bitten by my parents all my life, and the venoms just spread for what they did, or what my brother did, or what happened when I got divorced. My husband left me, my wife left me. But Joseph seemed like he learned from all those things, and it helped him to make really good choices. I mean, I'm trying to think of something he did wrong when I read through that story, that really where he didn't excel, and he didn't let life cause him to say, well, it's not my fault. Isaac and Rebecca had my dad and my Laban, my mom, and it's their fault. Look what they did. Look at the people in the family. He didn't do that. So that's why I wanted to bring in and incorporate the human side of this too. Because a lot of us, or most all of us, I guess, never had a choice in what family we came from. Some of us were, some of us were spoon-fed. That wasn't me. Some of us came from, but good families. Some came from chaotic families. Some came from abusive families. Some came from, that had abusive spouses, had abusive siblings, and have gone through life maybe with a lot of trigger points or something. Just a lot. We didn't have a choice, but we had to get through it. And so all of this is included in this story, and that's why I wanted to bring it in. So I'm going to start back at chapter 25. It's going to be a little choppy because I'm just using some scripture, not just reading through the scripture, but using some. And the first one is Genesis 25:19 through 28. This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled within her, and she said, "If all is well, then why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two people shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." And that meaning the one people will be stronger. She's talking about Esau. He'll be the strong one. But that actually Jacob, Esau will serve Jacob even though he's the second born. He's not the firstborn. So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment, so that's hairy all over. And the guy must have been beautiful. And so they called his name Esau. We could call him Esau, Harry, whatever you want to. Verse 26, afterward the brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew. And here's where it starts to give you some information. And Esau was a skillful hunter and a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents, like a sojourner. And I think that's representative of these two people. Esau typifies, you might say, an unbeliever, a hunter. He's sensual, not sexual, but he's into carnal things, hunting, all those things that we love to do. And Jacob was more of a man of faith. There was only two men in the scriptures that are called hunters. One was Esau, obviously, and the other one was Nimrod, which we find in Genesis 10. I think he was the one that was the builder of Babel, but he was, the fact they're linked together and Nimrod was considered a rebel, I think it reveals Esau's character too. Now this is the most important part of this little part right here. And in modern American English, the term Nimrod is often used sarcastically to mean a dim-witted or stupid person. A usage first recorded in 1932 and popularized by the Looney Tunes cartoon characters Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, who both sarcastically refer to the hunter Elmer Fudd as Nimrod. So somehow that's all tied together. I'm not sure. The next verse, verse 28, says, this is where it all begins going forward. It said, Isaac loved Esau because he ate his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So there's the parental favoritism that is disastrous. I don't know about you, but I've been guilty of that in my life, kind of unwittingly. I didn't mean to, but it came out like that. And the person that was not considered or not the favorite was deeply hurt by it. Well, this is where we begin to see this problem. It goes on, Esau sells his birthright. It's a strange story. I don't know why God lets all this stuff go on, because God had already told Rebecca that the older would serve the younger. So he's basically saying that Jacob was going to have the birthright, but Esau despised it. He came in one time and he said, now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field and was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name is called Edom. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, look, I'm about to die. I mean, he's hungry. I'm about to die. That reminds me of one of my sons. So what is the birthright to me? Then Jacob said, swear to me of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. He didn't really. It was already, he never had it really. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank and arose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. He just didn't care, it doesn't seem like. It says he was a profane man, I think, in the King James, and that means it's like he just didn't care about the things of God that much. But I think Jacob understood in this birthright thing that what came with the birthright was a messianic blessing, because it says in there, it talks about the blessing of the promised seed. So that's, you have parental favoritism. You have Esau, who's worldly, basically, along with Elmer Fudd and Nimrod. And now you see Jacob decide he's going to deceive his father into blessing him instead of Esau. I mean, this is just one deception after another going forward. I could have started before Isaac and Rebekah, but I just chose to start there. I could have gone all the way back and came forward, and you see deception and lying. So Jacob decides he's going to deceive his father. So Genesis 27, 5 and 6 says, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to, and here we go. I read this 2 or 3 times before I even saw this. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau, his son. And Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son. There it is again, saying, indeed, I've heard your father speak to Esau, blah, 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 blah. Genesis 27, 11 through 13, it says, and Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him. I don't think there's any seeming to be a deceiver to him. He is a deceiver. And I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. And then here's a good old mom. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice. So she's telling him to go deceive his father. And deception, lies, dysfunction. I mean, Jacob's 77 years old at this time. He's probably going, Mom, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm 77 years old. So he went to his father and said, my father, and his father said, here I am. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. And I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit, and eat my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And this is the one I like. Happens in church occasionally. It says, well, because the Lord your God brought it to me. I mean, how do you answer that one? The Lord told me you're to... Genesis 27, 24. Then he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. So this just seems to come very easy to them, no matter who it is in this family. Your brother came, and then Isaac says to Esau later, when Esau's figured out what's going on and is getting in a huff, and said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing, which was actually not true, and he was already to be the the firstborn, but and then 27:41. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, and I will kill my brother Jacob. So we got, that's pretty good. Kill, murder, hate, lying. Rebecca told Jacob to go. She had heard this from somebody. She had little spies out there somewhere, and she had heard this. So she told Jacob to go spend a few days with her brother until Esau cooled off. Then she'd send for him, and the Bible never says, but you can't find it anywhere that he ever spoke to his mother again. So that little deceiving game they were playing, that whole thing they were going through, looks as though it may have cost him a relationship with his mother for the rest of his life. And the last thing she did with her son was causing him to be deceitful. So now Jacob's on his way to Padanaram, and a 450-mile journey. And so all this has gone on, all this craziness, all this lying, all this deceiving, and the Lord shows up. This is the one where he goes to sleep and sees the ladder going up from heaven to, or from earth to heaven, and the angels descending and ascending. And the Lord says to him, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land, the one that he's having to leave. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And then he goes on, and he ends up over to old Uncle Laban's house, or estate, where he meets Rachel. And of course that relationship starts. And he goes back, and I think the first thing it says was he spent a month with Laban, even though it was just supposed to be a few days and then go home. But he spent a month. And then ultimately, he spent 7 years working for Rachel's hand in marriage. That's the deal he came to with Laban. And then 5 verses later, they're having the wedding. You know the story. They're having the wedding. And whether it's true or not, he wakes up in the morning, realizes he spent the night with Leah. And I'm not really sure he didn't know that. You start reading this stuff and you go, it could have been anything. But it says that he was angry and he said, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? Why are you deceiving the deceiver? You know, it's just everybody's deceiving everybody here. Something interesting about this to me, though, was that according to the word, if you read it, it shows that he was tricked, and Jacob was tricked, and Laban snuck old Leah right in there on the wedding night. But it's actually through Leah that she became like the mother of Christ, because she gave birth to Judah. So God used this sneaky old Laban to sneak Leah in there. If she hadn't, I'm sure Jacob wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have asked her to come in. But so if she hadn't have been in there, that line wouldn't have gone on like that. So Jacob worked 20 years for Rachel, and for Laban for another 7 years, for a total of, and 6 years for the goats, for a total of 20 years. And this is what he ended up with after 20 years. Let's go to the wives first. He ended up with 4 wives. And I'm telling you this because eventually Joseph is born to Rachel, and so when he's young, he gets to inherit this family of 4 wives, 10 brothers. They mention 1 sister. It could be many. Who knows? So this is quite a dysfunctional family, a confusing one at least. And So Jacob ended up with 4 wives: Rachel, Leah, Zilpah, which was Leah's maid, or it's like a concubine, and Bilhah, which was Rachel's, the counterpart for Rachel. Next it says, Genesis 29:31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and the word in Hebrew doesn't mean unloved, it means hated. The Lord saw that she was hated. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah had 6 sons. Reuben, which was the firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and a daughter that shows up in the book, I think chapter 34, Dinah. Rachel, at the end, ends up with 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And then Bilhah had 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali, and Zilpah, Gad, and Asher. So anyway, so they all lived together. I'm sure it was interesting. I'm sure Jacob didn't complain a whole lot. And maybe he did. Maybe he made a fuss and made it look like it. But he had 4 wives, and actually all these kids were born, with the exception of Benjamin. They were born almost on top of each other. There was only 6 or 7 years difference between Reuben the first and Joseph, because there were so many women and so much competition, and everybody, babies coming out everywhere, boys coming. So that's just how fast it happened. You expected there to be like maybe 15 years or something, 12, 15 years, but there was just a few years. And so finally, it comes to a point after 20 years, and Joseph would have been about 5 or 6 now. So see, now that's why I wanted to do this, because now Joseph's part of the family, and he's old enough to start recognizing some things. He's old enough to hear conversations and start putting 2 and 2 together with some things. But something interesting happens here, I think, and it's in Genesis 30:25. Jacob wants to leave, and so it says, it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service for which I've done to you. And I just feel like something happened, because finally the woman that he loved, truly loved, which was Rachel, the only one he loved, I believe, gave birth to Joseph, and that just did something. So he was ready now. He was ready to go. He'd been there 20 years. He'd been going through all this. And then about 2 verses later, Laban says, after he says, let me go, or send me away, Laban said to him, please stay. 20 years wasn't enough, I guess. Please stay if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience. So it's just what it says. I've learned by experience. I've seen that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Then he said, name your wages and I will give it. So Laban, tricky old Laban, dirty old Laban, he's even recognizing that everything that Jacob does, the Lord blesses, and it's ultimately blessing him. So he said, don't go, whatever you want, just name your wages. And that's going to be similar to what happens to Joseph in chapter 39, where Potiphar realizes that the same thing's happening to him because of Joseph. Everything Joseph touches just turns to gold, and it affects Potiphar. Everything he has increases. Genesis 31:13. Now, I think this is the part, I'm sorry this is choppy, but I think this is the part where God says to Jacob, he says, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, where you made a vow to me, and that was back there at the ladder. now rise and get out of this land and return to the land of your family. So he's saying enough's enough. This 20-year thing, it's got to come to an end. The Jacob part of you has to come to an end. The kind of more worldly part, or the guy that's after money. Laban was a money guy. He'd do anything for money. He sold his daughters. He changed weight. He'd just do anything for money. Well, Jacob wasn't much better. He was wanting to leave, and remember, he got in the argument with Laban, and then they talked about the goats and the speckled goats and the white and the brown goats, and Jacob saw a chance to make not dollars and bills, but goats and sheep, and so he was jumping right back in there for the money himself. So they weren't much different they were part of the gene pool together, it seemed like. In Genesis 31, 22 through 24, Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days. And he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good or bad." So I think before that, Jacob, no, it's after this. Anyway, so you have God speaking to an unbeliever, basically, and telling him, don't put your hands on Jacob, no matter what. There's no good or bad. This thing's over. And let me flip the page here, if I can. So anyway, they go through this thing. Jacob blows up at Laban, I think, because Laban goes into the tents and tears everything apart looking for his gods. And I'm telling you, if your God is hiding under a pillow or something in a tent, you have the wrong God, I think. Or if your God is sitting in the saddlebag of a camel and your daughter's sitting on your God, then you got the wrong God. God's a little bit bigger than that. And but he's worried about his little teraphim. So anyway, they kind of make an agreement. Okay, you don't come past here, I don't go past there, and off goes Laban. And that's the end of Laban. We never see or hear from him again. And then, so Jacob finally gets rid of that problem and turns around, and now here comes Esau. So now he's got to deal with what happened back in the beginning, where he ran when he stole the birthright and the blessing. And Joseph was about 4 or 5 years old at this time, somewhere in there. So he was with them and cognizant of what was going on. And I'm sure he probably heard about Esau at some point in time. So Jacob, in Genesis 32, 1 and 2, says, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. What God was doing was allowing Jacob to see that he told him before, I'll be with you, and wherever you go, I'll take care of you in everything you do. So now he's taking care of Laban. And all of a sudden, here comes Esau, who said, I want to kill him when Dad dies. I'm going to murder him. I think God wanted Jacob to see that he wasn't alone. He was in this place. And the second Mahanaim, the second camp, it was like a camp of God's host, that Jacob could see that they were there with him, for him. Chapter 33 is Jacob and Esau. They finally meet. It's time they've got to make amends. It's funny, both of these guys, they live so long compared to you and me that you forget how old they are. Here they are ready to, maybe Jacob doesn't realize it, but they're ready to, maybe Jacob doesn't realize it, but they're ready to reconcile, and they're over 100 years old at this point. Both of them are somewhere just over 100 because they were born the same time. And I think they're still sprite. I don't think they died for another 60 or 70 years. So they still got a lot of kick left in them. Genesis 33 says, Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him 400 men. So you can imagine what he thought. Holy Toledo. He's going to make good his promise. And he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front. That's pretty brave. He puts them out front. And then he put Leah and her children behind them. And then he put Rachel, the one he loved, with Joseph in the rear. But this is where he kind of redeemed himself. It said, then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. And it sounds to me like he bowed, he got up and walked a little further, then he bowed. He just kept bowing as he went until he got closer and closer. Not exactly what the guy who has the birthright and who's going to be, the other guy is going to be serving him, not exactly what he would be doing normally. And I think this is another case where you see God had told him he'd be with him no matter what, and yet here's Jacob deciding he's going to do this his own way, just to make sure it works out. Because God may not know exactly what he needs to do here. So he has presents for him, basically bribes for him. And everybody's bowing down. I think as you go on in the scripture, Leah, the maidservants and their children bow down to Esau. Then Leah and the children bow down, and then Rachel and Joseph. So everybody's bowing down to Esau. And it's really funny because Esau just kind of, it seems like when you read it, you get this picture, he just goes, what's all this? And it said he came up and it's like the prodigal son almost. He came up and just laid himself on Jacob and gave him a big kiss. And everything was fine in his eyes. And he didn't even want the gift, but Jacob finally talked him into it. And that's an interesting thing to me because the person that actually would respond like that was Esau and not Jacob. But anyway, after this, he wanted Jacob to go with him. So Jacob said, well, I'd go, but the kids are, they're tired and the lambs are weak, and we'll catch up with you and seer. And so he kind of goes back from Israel. God said, I'm changing your name from Jacob to Israel. He kind of slips back into the Jacob mode and starts deceiving Esau again and says, yeah, I'll catch up with you, when he had no intention of doing that. So he takes off the other way, and this is where it really gets kind of sad. Now keep in mind, the reason I'm doing this is Joseph is here now. He's with them. He's watching this. He's going through this. So Genesis 33:18 says, then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. And when he came from Padan, then he pitched his tent before the city. God had told him to go on. He'd told him to go to Bethel, I believe. And he stopped there for some reason. In the Bible, it talks about Succoth and Shechem, and so they must be together or the same thing. But anyway, he went there and he stopped for some reason. And if you look at the timeline, he was there about 8 to 10 years for some reason. He wasn't even supposed to stop there, really, maybe to water the camels but he stopped there that long. And that's where chapter 34 comes in, where his family just begins to come apart. It falls apart starting with the rape of Dinah by Shechem, I think the prince of Hamor's son. I think Joseph was 10 to 12 years old at this time when this happened. And this is crazy what happens here. Genesis 34 says, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. I think he genuinely fell in love with her because he really wanted to be married to her, and he begged them to let him be with her. And it said I think in the Bible it says that he spoke kindly to her heart. So it wasn't like just some guy that just raped her and then ran off. He really did care. Um, and so anyway, the sons, I think it was, let's see, who was it? It was Levi and Simeon. They came up with this plan. They thought of it real easy, real quick and real easy, but they wanted them to stay, the Hivites wanted them to stay with them, and we can intermarry, and they thought, well, we're going to cut quite the deal here. We're going to get their cows, and we're going to get everything. And the sons said, well, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. So basically they were using that as an excuse, because they were angry, they were mad. And this whole episode here basically made mass murderers out of Simeon and Levi. And even though that was bad, you know, Jacob had a part in this too, because he was supposed to go on, and he stayed there. He did the wrong thing. He should have listened to God and kept moving, and he didn't. So a lot of people had a part in this. Genesis 34, 25, 27 said, now it came to pass on the third day that when they were in pain, this is after they'd all been, they must have said, oh, okay, we'll just get circumcised. This is a piece of cake. Now it came to pass on the third day that when they were in pain, that the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Diana's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Diana from Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob, so it's more than Simeon and Levi. It looks like it's the sons, like a lot of the sons or all of them. I can't imagine Joseph being part of that, because he just, as we go on and read the story about him, he avoided things like that. He wasn't part of. In fact, he'd run and tell his dad when they were doing. But it seems like the other sons got involved in this too. And they plundered the city because their city had been defiled. And just a side note, it said some commentators I was reading, it said they felt that she became pregnant by her worldly relationship, that first she was violated, and then she kind of got into it, you know, her worldly friends, and she ended up becoming pregnant. I don't know if this is true, but in Genesis 46:10, they mention Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman, as part of a genealogy, I think, and they think that might have been her son from getting pregnant in that relationship. You have to decide that, I think, that's just what I read. And then, I know I'm jumping along, but it's for a reason. Then chapter 35, all of a sudden, Rebecca's nurse comes up in the scriptures. And it said, now Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree. So the name of it was called Elon Bakuth. And I think the only other time she's mentioned is in chapter 24 when Rebecca agreed to go with Isaac, and then they gave her nurse to go with her, and that was Deborah. And she's 130 plus years old right here. These are some old people. Listen, been around for a long time. But so he leaves. He's supposed to go to Bethel. They stop. His daughter gets raped. Some of his sons get involved in this mass murder, you might say. The family just starts coming apart. And Joseph is now he's with them. He's watching these things. And now he sees Deborah, who may have been very dear to him because it was the nurse of his grandmother, that she died. And this is the place where God changes Jacob's name to Israel. And I think this is the point where, well, if not here, it's the very next part where Rachel dies. So first, Deborah dies, Rebekah's nurse. That's from the past. Laban's gone. Esau's gone. And now Deborah's gone. And now Rachel dies. Joseph was 16 or so when his mother died. It looks like God's just cleared everything out. And this is the same approximate time when he changed Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel, to the more spiritual name, and now bringing Jacob back into communion with God. Genesis 35 says, "Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath," that's Jerusalem, or Bethlehem, "Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, 'Do not fear, you will have the son also.' And so it was, as her soul was departing," she was dying, "that she called his name Ben-Oni," which I think, but the father called him Benjamin. Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day, the day when this was written. It doesn't sound like he'd mourned her much, and yet that was the one he loved. But in doing some research, it said this pillar that he set was called a mark of sorrow. So he was broken, and I'm sure Joseph was broken too. I mean, many others were probably broken, but those two were I'm sure were very broken. And of course, that's not the end of it. And then sometime shortly thereafter, it says in Genesis 35, 21 and 22, Reuben, the firstborn, decides he's going to sleep with Jacob's concubine, Bilhah, which was Rachel's maidservant. And it says, "Then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And it happened when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and laid with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it." Meaning Jacob, or Israel, the man Israel heard about it, but he didn't say anything. And I thought if anybody could have comforted Jacob at that time, it probably would have been her, Bilhah, because she was connected so closely to Rachel. And yet and I don't know if she was part of that, if that was something she wanted, she had a hitch in her get along, or, I mean, something was going on, or if Reuben, it was more forceful than that, but it must have been devastating to Israel. So that kind of ends one part. And real quick, I want to do a couple more things, and that is, so we know Joseph's about 16 years old, but I want to back up and go and look at his home life, kind of. He came from a place of being loved. I think he was tenderly loved by his mother, Rachel, and I think his dad loved him. He devotedly. I think he made that tunic for him, which spoke of that, and he spoke of how much he loved him. And the other boys knew it, and that caused a lot of problems. But he was detested by just about everyone else because of this stuff. And it's kind of a wonder sometimes that he survived his childhood, probably because Rachel was alive. If she would be like a bear robbed of her cubs. If they mess with Joseph, they're going to have to mess with her, and they probably were a little bit smart. They were smart enough not to do that, probably. But I think I told you they were born on top of each other almost. They were born in a very short time, close to each other. And then there's a little bit about Joseph's mother, Rachel. And these are things I think he may have learned as he goes on, and as we go through, starting in chapter 37, you might be able to go back and see where some of these people that was in his life may have influenced him, but he did it in a positive way, where we a lot of times let it get to us negatively. I know there was one in here about Esau and forgiveness, and I thought, well, there's probably one I should go back and study Esau a little bit better. But it said that Joseph learned one great lesson from his mother, and that was patience. That she waited 7 years for Jacob to marry him while he worked. And then when she got to a certain point, he worked 6 more years so he could get more money, so he could raise more goats and sheep. And so she probably taught Joseph or he saw things in her that may have spoke to him in the area of patience, and that may have helped him when he was forgotten in prison in Egypt. Because in the book, and as we go through the book, we'll see that God never reveals himself to Joseph. He doesn't show up like he did here. He showed up 5 times to Jacob. So this patience that he saw in his mom may have helped him at a later time. Let's see. Oh, Aunt Leah. Here we go. Aunt Leah was Joseph's aunt, his mother's sister, but he was also his father's wife. So that's a very uncomplicated relationship for him to try and deal with and to figure out what to do with all that. I'm sure that he saw that she was unloved. God said that she was hated. And you can only imagine that he saw things and heard things maybe that, that he could put 2 and 2 together as he went on in time. I'm sure Jacob was probably cordial to her at one point in time until he was married to her. And I think a lot of us have done that when we were dating, when we were young and we were dating somebody. You'd be cordial to the girl's sister because you wanted the girl to like you, so you were nice to her sister, or vice versa, nice to the brother. And so that could have been the case. That could have been how she was treated. Joseph could have seen that. He could have known that seen the hypocrisy and all that. I think then there's a little bit on Laban here. And Laban, for the first 6 formative years of Joseph's life, Joseph lived in this blended family. This was a family that was in the blender, I think. It was a mess. And he lived in Laban's estate. So I'm sure he saw, even though he was young, he saw a lot of the traits of this nasty old man, Laban, this scoundrel. And but I think that would have helped him too, that he could have helped him later when he was in Egypt and learn to act with integrity in the things that he did, because he just look at what Laban did and do the opposite. Laban was a committed pagan. He had his little teraphim, and he was worried more about his little gods than he was about anybody in the family or anything. He wanted to know where his little gods were, the ones you could sit on or sleep on. And I think that, Joseph must have seen that, and I think he had enough upbringing through his dad, because he knew more of his dad, Israel, than he knew him as Jacob. So he knew that side of him more than the Jacob side of him. But I'm sure that Joseph, as he got older, could remember that why would you worship a God that can't see, that has eyes but can't see, ears but can't hear, a mouth but can't speak? When he actually knew and had knowledge of the living God. So I think that was something that where Laban could have influenced Joseph in a positive way later. And he was going to Egypt. He didn't know it at the time, but in Egypt they have gods that I think they have crocodiles, they have crickets, they have beetles, they have cats. They just anything and everything's a god to them down there. And so he would be immune to that sort of thing. And one more thing, and this is kind of interesting to me, it was anyway, and we'll get into it more later in the book, I think chapter 49, but it's what Jacob, I would guess the word I'd use is prophesied about the boys, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and he went right through the list. And so we have Reuben, the one that slept with Bilhah, and Jacob said in Genesis 49:4, you are unstable as water. You shall not excel because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi, Jacob described them as instruments of cruelty. Their anger was fierce and cruel, and it wasn't a righteous anger for the Lord. It says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. This is what Jacob said when he was old. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And then there was Judah, where we know he ended up in a good place. But this one writer called him calculating Judah, and he said it was the son of Leah. It said his motto was, what's in it for me? And John Phillips, a commentator, said this was not a man troubled by moral scruples. He didn't have to worry about that in his life. It didn't bother him. It was Judah, but it was Judah that actually interceded for Benjamin in the story of Joseph later on. And then there was Dan. It said he had a lawyer's mind and a way with words that could quickly cut a person down to size and make his victims squirm. Jacob later called him a serpent, 49:17. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heel, so that its rider shall fall backwards. These are just some of the, I don't want to read all of them, it takes too much time. These are just some interesting things, and a lot of these things, this family life to me was interesting to me because of, I stand a lot to learn from the family I had and the way Joseph responds to things in his life. And one more thing, I think it said Joseph's uncle Esau. Joseph must have heard a lot about Esau, but only saw him once. And that was a blessing, I guess. At the ford of Jabbok, that's where the camp Mahanaim was. This author's insight was interesting. He said, from Uncle Esau, Joseph learned that an unsaved man can have generous impulses also. But he said Esau displayed a magnanimous forgiveness that may have taken away young Joseph's breath and left his father trembling. He thought if anybody would be forgiving, he really didn't suspect it would come from Esau like it did. And I think Joseph could have learned from Esau, of all people, about forgiveness when he forgave his brothers in Egypt, when he said that what the devil is meant for, I think he said devil is meant for evil, God is meant for good. Joseph's father Jacob, this is the last one. And I think it was that encounter with God at the ford of Jabbok that permanently changed Jacob when he saw the Mahanaim, the two camps, and he knew God was with him. And I said once before, Joseph knew his father as Israel more than Jacob, and this was no exception here at this moment in time. And so I think we see in when we get into Joseph, I know that one part where he's with Potiphar's wife and she just tempting him time after time after time. And he said, how could I commit this, what is it, wickedness and sin against God? And that's what I wonder if some of the things he learned from his dad Israel later on. In closing, I found this quote from John Phillips, and it said, Joseph lived in a hostile world, but nothing happened to him in his boyhood that was not necessary for his manhood. He learned to hate evil because he was surrounded by evil. And for the same reason, he learned to cherish and cultivate goodness. And many times his tears and fears as a child and in Egypt drove him into the arms of God. And here's where I think Joseph, I don't know about you, but he's much different than me. And I hope I learned from this. It said, for Joseph, the family into which he was born was a school. It was a hard school, but he passed his exams one by one thing at a time. He dealt with each thing and graduated with high honors, not only for this world, but for the world to come. And then John Phillips said, God expects us to do the same. And I know I really fall down a lot of times in that area. I keep going back. And then I saw this quote somewhere else. I don't even know where I got it, but this really spoke to my heart. I hope it does to yours. It said, our past does not have to be an anchor to hold us back. So we keep going back to unforgiveness. We keep going back to these trigger points. We keep responding the way we always have. And it says, our past does not have to be an anchor to hold us back, but can be used as a rudder to steer us through what lies ahead. So rather than this thing just keeping us where we never go forward in life, we always seem to go forward 2 steps and back 3 or back 2, or that we can actually use these things that have happened to us to help steer us in a good way into the future. So anyway, next week we'll start with chapter 37. I think it's verse 2. It's where we get into the real story of Joseph, and I think he's 17 years old. He's gone through all the stuff we went through tonight. He's gone through the death of Deborah, the death of his mom, the Esau. He's gone through nasty Laban. He's gone through a lot of heartache. Watched his brothers commit mass murder. I mean, this is the Joseph that we're going to be studying starting. And in this book that I found, actually it was recommended by Chuck Smith. It was called The Gleanings of Genesis. It's the whole book of Genesis. But he said there's over 100 cases where you see Christ in the scriptures, as we do in every book in the Bible. So I saw some the other day, but I wasn't there. But going forward from 37, there's a lot of them where we really see a foreshadowing of Christ and a type of Christ through Joseph. So anyway, let me pray. And Father, thank you so much for your word. There's so much in this word that I guess we get out of it what we put into it. We just causing us a hunger that maybe we haven't had till now, but causing us to hunger for your word and to find things like this, these gems that are in here. It's not only the things we see Christ in the scriptures, but there's so much here for us, for personal application to help us as we walk through life and to use as examples. So cause us to get excited, cause us to realize that maybe up until now we just read over the top of scriptures, but help us to know that there's so much here for us, and we should be overjoyed knowing that you love us that much, that you put this book together and you gave it to us to read. There's nothing like it. So we love you. Thank you for letting us gather here tonight. Thank you for the continued hand of protection you have on us and even the people at home. They may not be feeling the best, but you are protecting them and will get them through this. We love you, Father.